The Axeman of New Orleans. There was a killer that stalked our streets just a year ago. It frightened and shook our beautiful city of New Orleans to its core. The Axeman of New Orleans, they called him, and myself and other members of the Italian community were frightened to even go to bed at night. My name is Luigi Vespucci, and I was a detective during the Axeman's bloody spree. Now, while not all the attacks were against the Italian community, a majority of them were. We felt threatened. We felt hunted, just because of where we came from and just because of who we were. I had just been promoted to detective days before the murders of Joseph and Catherine Maggio on the night of May 23rd, 1918. They had been found at their home on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets. They owned a grocery store and bar room. I knew these people. I frequented their establishment. The frightening thing of it all was that I lived just 2 houses down from them. That crossed my mind as I was called to investigate the scene. As I entered that blood-splattered room, what if, I thought, what if this madman had decided to stop 2 houses down at my place instead of here? It would be me lying there on the bed with my throat slashed and head caved in with an axe. What he did to my friends was gruesome and barbaric, but sadly, besides finding a bloodied straight razor in the neighbor's front yard, which was used on both of the victims, and the killer's bloodied clothes that he changed out of after the murders, not much else was found. We questioned the brothers of Joseph, Jake, and Andrew, who found their bodies, and even detained Andrew, who shared the adjoining apartment next to the room of where the murders took place of his brother and sister-in-law. He was a barber, and even though it was his razor that was used to slice their throats, we had to release him because there wasn't enough evidence to disprove his alibi. After the horrific murders of the Maggios, more and more attacks took place across our city. More murders and more injuries. Thankfully, some of the victims survived. From crime scene to crime scene, I was called upon to investigate. Bloody mess after bloody mess. Always the same M.O. Chisel a panel of the back door, a way to gain entry into the home. Slither his way inside and attack and bludgeon his unsuspecting victims in their beds with an axe. The attacks always transpired at night, and a bloodied axe was always found at the scene, with the victim or victims usually being of Italian descent. It was a horrifying and strenuous time for our community and usually lively neighborhoods, but when the Axeman came, he changed all that. He officially claimed 6 members of our community, with his youngest victim being just 2 years of age, though there is believed to be more, and injured a further 6 individuals. The case finally came to a head and hit home for me on a personal level on the evening of September 10th, 1919. I was coming home late from work, trying to solve this damn case that consumed my entire being at that point. I was dog-tired. I barely managed to take off my jacket, and I collapsed into bed. I was then awakened in the middle of the night by a thud, and when I opened my eyes, I saw standing before me a shadowy individual. Before I could act, before even uttering a word, the shadowy figure leapt upon me with furious anger, hitting the side of my head with the blade of his axe. I felt lightheaded and instantly felt the warm gush of blood rush down the right side of my face, then fell unconscious. When I came to, I was already being treated for my wounds and being questioned by my fellow detectives. Thankfully, my neighbor called for help after hearing the commotion. Like all the other crime scenes, a panel on my back door was removed, and a bloody axe was found in the backyard. Mine was one of the last attacks perpetrated by the Axeman of New Orleans. The bastard mysteriously disappeared just as quickly as he appeared, and the murders and attacks stopped. One of the last things the Axeman did was send a macabre letter to the newspapers that was published, asking for the citizens to play jazz music, good and loud, 15 minutes past midnight, and that every house that played their jazz music would be spared, but for those that did not, would receive a visit from him, and he would claim them as his next victim. The city of New Orleans was more alive than ever that night, and not a single soul was claimed. No one knows why he showed up in the first place. There's never been any motives, and no one has ever been caught for these horrendous crimes. He just disappeared one autumn night, but he's still out there, waiting. I know it. I feel it. I'm just lucky enough to be able to say that I survived the Axeman of New Orleans.
There is a mansion deep in the New Orleans swamp, a stoic, white, fading, painted mansion that was built during the colonial days of cotton, built by a wealthy European family that decided to be amongst the Southern belles and gentlemen of the South. It sat atop a hill surrounded by the waters of the swamp, painted white with blue trimmings and blue shutters, adorned with beautiful lattices and lush green outstretched ivy. The family, hailing from the shores of Ireland, spent no expense at making their mansion the finest in the land, bringing in the finest materials from all across Europe. Marble from Italy, tapestries from France, wood from the forests of Germany, and frescoes from the finest artists of Spain. It truly was a piece of architectural beauty, and they called it the Rose Manor. Besides their beautiful mansion, the family was known for extravagant costume affairs. They were known far and wide as throwing the finest balls in the South. From as far up as to Virginia to as far west as Texas, the finest couples would travel to attend one of the famous dances at the Rose Manor. The story, however, takes a dark turn. When one night, on a cool autumn's evening in November of 1800, all of the attendees at the latest dance fell over dead without warning. The entire family of the Rush clan, along with their guests, were poisoned, wiping out the futures of some of the finest families the South had to offer. No one knows for certain what happened, but rumors surfaced of a disgruntled maid poisoning the punch bowl, and another rumor claimed the chef poisoned the cuisine for the catered affair. Whatever the instance, the incident was known from that night as Danse Macabre or Chorus Mortis, translated to the Dance of the Dead. So on the evening of every November the 18th since the horrific incident took place, it is said that the mansion comes to life. The manor has been abandoned for a century, but the tales persist. Whoever has been brave enough to venture near the mansion on that famous night has reported the sounds of ballroom music being played and the glow of candlelight emanating from the manor's windows. For those that are even braver and decide to take a closer peek and venture to one of the windows, they report witnessing a spectral ball taking place, with its guests adorned in their finest costumes dancing the night away like nothing ever happened. Just people that time forgot, trapped in their ghostly dimension with their friends and loved ones, as it was always meant to be, at the Dance of the Dead.
There is a house in New Orleans. New Orleans has been a family vacation spot for my family and I for years now. We love it because of its rich history, and we love to hear the stories behind the houses that we can tour and the ones that we cannot. One particular trip I will never forget was during the week of Valentine's Day 2012, 2 weeks before Mardi Gras. We had a memorable week of shopping, eating beignets, and chugging milk to soothe our Cajun food-burned tongues. The last night we were there, I was looking out the window of our hotel. I do not want trouble for mentioning the name, and a tear slipped down my face. I went to sleep in my room, my sister asleep in the bed next to me. It was a nice hotel, so my parents' room was connected to ours, and we had the little side room to ourselves. I woke up about 3 hours later, sometime around 2 or 3, with a discomforting headache. I put my head back down on the pillow and tried to go back to sleep. While I slept, I had a dream that I was walking briskly down the street because I was late for my train. Everything started spinning, and I woke up in a cold sweat, and I was screaming hoarsely for my dad. My sister was sitting on the corner of the bed, clutching a pillow. "Hunter, please stop! You're scaring me!" All I could do was scream for my dad, but my voice was barely a whisper. I guess I had been screaming in my sleep. My sister knocked loudly on my parents' door, begging for my dad to come help me. He came into the room and swore under his breath, heading for the bathroom. He brought me a cup of water and had to help me to drink it because I was shaking so badly. He put a cold washcloth on my head, and he helped me change into dry clothes. My pajamas were so soaked with my sweat that we had to lay them out to prevent them from soiling. My sister kept asking my dad why my eyes were so red. You could hardly see my irises and my pupil because the whites of my eyes were so inflamed. He told her to get back in bed and that I would be all right in the morning. She slept on the floor. The next day I was completely fine. I have no idea why I had that horrific experience. All I know is that hotel hasn't been an option for us during more recent visits. My dad won't allow me to talk about the incident anymore. There could be a logical explanation as to why my body was behaving that way, but I believe it had something to do with the paranormal. The Vampire of New Orleans. It was not a surprise or rarity for a port city in the latter colonial years to be rough around the edges, a place you wouldn't want to take the missus on a Sunday stroll, so to speak. And the port city of New Orleans was no exception. The landscape could be rough for a southern gentleman to linger into, from pirates and cutthroats to salty old seamen, grizzled seafarers and laborers in the midst of their duties don't always take kindly to the softer crowd invading their territory, don't you know? The port of New Orleans wasn't particularly violent heading into the autumn of 1802, but that all seemed to change with the arrival of the Widow's Weep, a vessel that came from the province of Aquitaine off the shores of France. She was mostly a cargo ship, but on this particular voyage, she was carrying a large collection of a young count's personal belongings. His name was Count Louis Valois, whose family is one of the oldest in all of France, a descendant of kings. His family's manor in Aquitaine was one of the oldest and finest in all the lands, but the Count wanted to change and decided to travel to America. On board the Widow's Weep contained all of his personal belongings, some very large containers, as well as multiple crates. The Count's name was also on the ship's manifest, as well suggesting he was also on board. However, on the evening of November 19th, the Widow's Weep appeared on the horizon without warning. Its lanterns, dimly lit, was the only sign you could tell it was approaching. The harbor master and his men tried to signal for the ship to stop, but their efforts were useless. The ship just kept barreling towards the docks. As the ship neared closer and closer, the men on the dock scattered, and just as they did, the ship crashed where they had just been standing. The ship rested up against the destroyed dock and just bobbed up and down in the water, eerie and lifeless. The harbor master shouted for the captain on the Widow's Weep, or for any of the crew to make their presence known, but there was no answer. The ship was dark and quiet. Only the soft glow from a few lanterns illuminated parts of the upper deck. After a few moments, waiting for a response or some sign of life from the ship's crew, the harbor master took a few men and boarded the eerie ship. It was black, with only brief glows of light, lighting their way as the lantern swayed back and forth from the wind that had just picked up. And what they were able to see in the lantern light chilled them to their very soul. Thick pools of blood greeted them on top deck. They moved further up deck towards the helm and gazed upon two severed arms still gripping the helm tightly. But the body that belonged to those severed arms was nowhere to be found. They continued to search the ship, and each grisly scene they happened upon was more gruesome than the next. The entire crew was torn from limb to limb. They finally made their way to the captain's quarters, where they found him dead, lying in his bed, still pretty much intact, but he had 2 puncture wounds in his throat and a huge gash in his chest, with his heart being removed. They thought the puncture wounds to be a strange twist added to all this carnage. A few of the other bodies they happened across that weren't completely ripped apart had the same 2 puncture wounds to the neck. But what did they mean? The boarding party collected 2 books from the captain's quarters, the captain's log and the ship's manifest, and continued on. The harbor master read from the captain's log to see if there were any clues to what had happened here. He came to a passage from November 10th, about a week ago. The captain reported some of the crew were complaining of strange noises coming from the cargo hold. Not long after that crew began to disappear. Then on the 12th, the first body was found. The first mate, Wilkins, who was savagely torn apart. Then, one after another, more death, more savagery. Someone, or something, was killing the men on the Widow's Weep. But who? The last journal entry was from 2 days ago. The captain said he and a deckhand named Charles had cornered whatever it was in the cargo hold and locked it in. After reading that the harbor master and his men checked the cargo hold but found nothing, no signs of carnage or disturbance, and nothing was missing from the manifest. All personal items belonging to Count Valois was still on board. Speaking of the Count, it said on the manifest that he was a passenger, but after checking the stateroom, there was no sign of the man, no sign of anyone even staying in the room, and his corpse was not found amongst the dead. What happened to the young Count? About an hour after the ship had crashed upon the docks. Out of the commotion and chaos emerged a stately fellow, claiming to be the Count's lawyer, and produced a letter to the harbor master, written in the Count's hand and stamped with his official seal, asking for his effects to be delivered to his two properties, the mansion in the French Quarter and his mansion in the bayou. The harbor master agreed and sent the Count's belongings on their way. The Count himself was not seen officially until a week after the crash at a dinner party held by Marie Latrue, who was pretty much the who's who in New Orleans high society at the time. Little did people know, though, is the first disappearance happened that night, the beginning of a stream of many. A maid at the party, named Julie Leclerc, was the first. She was never found. Then maids from all around the city, from the finest households, started to disappear, and people started to notice there were always two constants. The parties were at night, and the Count was always in attendance. People had their suspicions now, but that's all they were, suspicions. He was a Count. He was descended from royalty. It would not be polite or proper to question such a gentleman in high society. Then bodies started to be found across the city, with having two puncture holes to the neck, dead and drained blood, with the bodies always being found near the vicinity of the Count's properties. People started to be quite alarmed and angered over the deaths of their loved ones. Many who were last seen near are going into one of the Count's mansions. So the sheriff and an angry mob tracked the Count down to his mansion in the bayou, or so they thought. The mansion was empty. The Count was not home, but they did find the remains of some of the missing, savagely torn apart and drained of blood. They burnt his mansion in the bayou down to its foundation, then searched his mansion in the French Quarter, but once again they found nothing. He just simply disappeared, leaving death and carnage in his wake. People were shocked at first, not understanding how a young gentleman such as the Count could perform such savagery. We now know that answer. We now have a name for what he is. For he is a vampire. The death that stalks the night. The people thought the Count had been gone for good, but not long after people started to disappear again, and their bodies found with two puncture holes to the neck, completely drained of blood. It's continued throughout the years. No matter the decade, no matter the century, it continues. He's still out there, feeding. So whatever you do, however safe you feel, don't walk the streets of New Orleans at night. New Orleans and the Dauphine Orleans. Let me preface this by saying I know this story sounds insane, and if anyone told me this story, I'm so skeptical that I don't know that I'd believe them. But it happened to me, and I need to share it. About 9 years ago, my then 4-year-old and I went on a 2-week 5-state road trip. The last week of the trip, we stayed at the Dauphine Orleans in New Orleans. I don't know if y'all remember, but it was the summer that there was record-breaking heat waves, and everyone was actually being discouraged from traveling. Well, We lived in Southeast Texas at the time, where it was hot, so we figured we could be hot there or hot traveling, so we traveled. Since travel was down that summer, we got some really good discounts on hotels. The room we got at the Dauphine was normally reserved for honeymooners, or at least not for anyone under 18. I say this because our room was separate from the main part of the hotel, but was not across the street if you're familiar with the hotel. The Dauphine at one time had slave quarters and was a bordello. Anyways, so we checked in on a Monday and stayed through Sunday. As the week went on, little weird things started to happen. So Tuesday night I went out onto our balcony. Our room took up the entire floor, and the balcony was the length of the room and had the stairs that led to the door. I was greeted by a middle-aged black maintenance man who said he was lighting our outside lanterns. No problem. He did his job and went on his way. Wednesday, our key card stopped working, and I got it reprogrammed at the front desk. Also, the batteries on our remote stopped working, and a different maintenance guy showed up to replace those. Thursday, we had pizza delivered, and I stepped outside to find a trash receptacle large enough for it, and was greeted by the same black middle-aged maintenance man, this time at the bottom of our stairs, who said he'd take care of it for us. Friday night, I was uploading vacation photos to Facebook. It was back when it was a bit longer process to upload than it is now. My baby was asleep, and in my head I said, as soon as this last pic uploads, I'm gonna watch a little TV. At the exact second I hit upload, the TV turned on by itself and was full blast sound. It always turned on at top volume. I don't know why, and it was slightly annoying. I jumped up and ran to the bed to grab the remote that was sitting on the edge and turned it down as quickly as I could. I stepped back and was standing in the middle of the room, but closer to the doors, French doors, of course, and that's when this orb appeared. It was solid, but not solid. It was round, but not a perfect circle. It was more like plasma than anything, and although it didn't have a face, as it slowed down and passed by me, I could tell it was looking at me. The funny thing was, when it realized I was looking back at it, it got scared and zoomed off and disappeared. I looked everywhere in the room, trying to figure out if there was some way to recreate what I'd seen or try to give some rational explanation for what I'd seen. I couldn't find any. So I called my friend, who is an insomniac. This was about 2 a.m. She instructed me to tell who, or whatever, was there that they needed to leave because they were scaring me and I had a baby to take care of. So I made her stay on the phone with me while I said it. By this time, I was sitting at the desk, which is where I was when I uploaded the photos. The bathroom was to my right, if I was facing the desk, and the rest of the room to the left. I happened to be facing the bed, so as I spoke to the room, a cold breeze flew past me. Later the next week, when I was at work, a coworker walked past me quickly, and it was the exact same feeling of cool air moving past. So I talked to her for a little while longer and then tried to get some sleep. I also ended up calling another friend who's a cop and super level-headed to calm me down. Anyways, I laid down and tried to close my eyes. Every few seconds, I'd open them again and look around to see if I saw anything, and then try to close them again. One of the times I open them, I see this figure start to appear out of the wall, like it was moving through the wall. I could tell it was a woman. I could see her dress and some of her hair, and just as her face was coming through, I gasped. Apparently, she was just as surprised that I could see her as I was. She jumped back into the wall, or through it. I don't know. It was all too much at that point, and I just held my baby close and went to sleep. Saturday. I should preface this with the fact that we were booked through Sunday, and since it was less than 24 hours notice, if I had canceled our room and just checked out, we wouldn't have gotten a refund per their policy. I was freaked out by what had happened, but I'm frugal and wasn't about to waste money. I talked to a few of the people who work there. One of them, the main security guard, is incredulous as I tell him I saw the woman until I described her. Then he said, "Wow, you did see her." According to him, only he and one other guy had ever seen her, and they'd been working there forever. I also told him about the orb, and he said, "Huh? That's weird. They usually only see that in room 232, which shared a wall with our room." Then he tries to tell me not to worry, and they probably didn't even know I was there. Then the bartender comes out and she says, "Oh, she probably came to check on you because you have a kid. We think she had a kid or likes to watch over kids." So we go back to our room and I put the baby to bed. Then I find this book in the desk that tells you all these things to do while in New Orleans. There were other guidebooks out in other places, so I never looked in the desk and never opened this book. Really, it was more like a binder. Towards the back, I see a tab that says paranormal or something to that effect, so I turned to it. They'd had at least one paranormal team visit the hotel. I want to say maybe more than one, but I don't remember exactly. The findings of the investigation were a soldier who could be found wandering in one of the courtyards, a dancing girl who had been seen dancing on our balcony, and a middle-aged black maintenance man. That was enough for me. I closed the book, put it back in the desk, and went to bed. I woke up the next morning and started rushing around to try and pack since we had to check out. I ran around closing every drawer and door and then stopped dead in my tracks. I hadn't opened the drawers and doors. They were all just standing open when I woke up. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.